All right, you guys, our guest today is known online as Carnivore JT. He is a leading fitness and food influencer, host of the Inner Carnivore podcast, and author of The Carnivorous Cookbook. With a background in collegiate baseball and coaching, he brings extensive experience in strength and conditioning. Carnivore JT's journey into the carnivore diet led to significant health improvements, inspiring his mission to help others achieve optimal well being through his Savage Carnivore Fitness Coaching Program. And we just love him for his personality, humor, and realness. So, welcome to the show, JT.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I'm excited to have you here, and I just love the fact that your company's name is Savage. I mean, that's pretty dope.
I love
Yeah,
it.
so
Well,
I
go
like
ahead.
actually so the inner carnivores is what it started as, and then I based the podcast off that. And when I decided to go coaching and then a few more physical products, I was like, man, I feel like I need something that's a little more like sounds like, the inner carnivore is like a mantra almost, right? Like I like it. I'm good with it. That was my first logo. And I was like, man, I feel like I need something else. I was like, man, I feel like if we're going to be carnivore, I feel like it's got to be something like savage. Like I like that. So yeah, that's how that
So
came
much
about.
more of an edge to Savage, you know? I dig it.
Exactly.
I love that. I want to dive into just your personal journey into the carnivore diet, really what initially motivated you to make as what others view as such a drastic change.
So I kind of got my feet wet with animal based first. Like a lot of people, Saladino was my first exposure into the space. And honestly, so I spent my 20s as an athlete, a coach, an amateur bodybuilder, worked in the fitness industry. Literally my entire 20s, I was in really good shape. And then got married, had kids, got dad bod a little bit. And then finally was like, all right, I need to change this. And I kind of went back to my old habits and I started to lose weight, but I didn't feel better. And I honestly, like, for lack of a better way to explain it, I did 90 days of Whole30, which is just straight whole foods, no processed foods, no cheating, like didn't take a snack off a kid's plate, nothing. And I lost some weight. I didn't feel better. And literally at the end of it, I was like, this is some BS. I was like, I literally was strict for 90 days. I ate vegetables. I hate vegetables. I ate lean ground turkey, lean red meat. I was like, this is stupid, and gained all the weight back in like a month. I was like, well, if I'm going to feel like crap, I might as well eat whatever I want. And my wife sent me Saladino. She's like, all right, it's a little kooky, but just, take a look at it. I was like, I can get behind that. I'm like, that's not too far off from what I've done in the past. So I did it, and I call it dirty animal based is what I did. My meals were animal based, mostly red meat. And then I just snacked whenever I wanted, whatever I wanted, right? If I wanted chips, I wanted to have a drink, whatever it was. And I got really good results and I felt good. I was like, man, this is weird. I was like, I'm not even being very strict. So I finally decided after, ironically enough, I lost all my weight without being strict. And people will go, you only lost 30 pounds in 2 years? I was like, no, I lost it in 3 months. And then was like, maybe I should get strict now. And then I started feeling better. And then so I did animal based for about 9 months, 10 months, and then the strict animal based. And I was down to such low carbs. I was like, man, what if I just go full carnivore? Like, what if it's like 50 grams of carbs? What if I just cut it out, try and, lean up just a little bit more? And I did. And I was like, man, I feel even better. I was like, huh, I guess I don't need them. So that's how I kind of ended up into it. And it was honestly this realization that my gym bro diet from before just wasn't cutting it anymore. I was like, I can still get the physical results, but I just don't feel as good. I don't have as good energy. I don't sleep as good. I still have some digestive issues. And so it was nothing major that drove me to carnivore. It was the age old bodybuilding of experimentation, right? Like, how do I feel if I eat this? All right, I feel better. So now what if I do this? And it just continued and I landed on carnivore. And honestly, I'm like, you know what? I just feel better this way. It's not that I can't eat whatever I want. It's not that I couldn't eat other stuff. That's just what has been my optimal.
I think like a lot of people, when you decided it's time to lose the weight, right? You went back to doing what you'd done in the past, which was like the old, again, the bro diet, the bodybuilding diet. And it's funny because my experience is very similar to yours in that when I went back to it, I don't know, were you a if it fits your macros guy or just straight, rice and chicken, broccoli?
So I would do if it fits your macros outside of prep. I had this like innate knowledge that if I was going to do a prep and I was really going to lean up, I had to get rid of processed food. Like, so people would ask like, I was like, yeah, I have macros that I stick to. I can still tell you like right off the top of my head, I would start at 50% carbs, 30% protein, 20% fat. And those are my macros. And I would slowly keep the protein the same. I would lower carbs and up fats a little bit. And then my calories would go down. But it was always the processed food. And that's what I would tell clients. I was like, just get rid of processed food. I didn't know why, but I knew that if I would get rid of processed food, I would lean up like crazy. And so I tried that again and I started to lean up, but it was the how I felt, I was like, man, like maybe I didn't feel as good as I thought in my 20s. Like maybe I thought I felt really good, like probably because I looked really good, but maybe I didn't feel as good as I thought I did.
I think age covers up a lot. And, both of our experiences as well with bodybuilding, most of it happened through our 20s, for me, a little bit into my 30s. And you don't recognize how terrible you feel until you are an adult with kids and you have to get up early in the morning, you're working your real job, right? Like it's 14-hour days between work and kids and all the family stuff. And then you recognize that, like, yeah, I can't keep doing what I did in the past because that's just not working for me anymore. And that's where I think you take that next step of, all right, it's not just about the body. It really is about my energy, my sleep, and all these other things. And that's what I think is, so incredible about, again, this journey you went on, and the fact that you found Saladino. I think for us too, it was Saladino and Chafee kind of at the same time, and that broke things wide open. It was like, we don't have to have vegetables. Like, this is, I mean, for me, that was amazing.
Let's just be real for a minute. Mike was like, we don't need vegetables. I'm like, you are out of your mind. Like, we need green beans and we need broccoli and we have children and they need these nutrients. And he was like, no, they don't. I'd gone away for a business trip and he's home with the kids. They're 7 and 10. At that point, they were, I don't know what, 8 and 5.
8 and 5.
And he didn't feed them any vegetables. And I got home and I was like, oh my gosh, what is the matter with you? You malnourished our children. Like, this is crazy. And it was the interview with Chafee where I was like, oh, all right, I'm going to try this now. And we haven't had a vegetable on our table in 2 years.
Kid's gonna be
Well,
happier.
yeah, that was huge for me because I was the king of coming up with new ways to do vegetables and then letting them rot in the back of my fridge. Like I would eat it fresh. I'd be like, okay, this isn't too bad. Like I can work with this. And then I would go to reheat it and I'm like, no, I'm just gonna like pick out the protein and I'm just gonna, and I would just end up dumping pounds and pounds of vegetables because I could not make them palatable from a reheated standpoint.
Yeah. It's wilted spinach, wilted spinach. If I never have to smell wilted spinach again or wilted arugula, I will be happy for the rest of my life.
Do you think that was really, though, the key to making it work for you? Meaning, when I say the key, taking out the vegetables, because obviously as bodybuilders, we're always heavily protein based to begin with, and then like you mentioned, it is the manipulation of fats and carbohydrates largely that help us make these changes in body composition. But I never in that time ever thought once that I shouldn't have vegetables. And I think once I took them out, that's what made me feel better. That's where all the digestive issues started to dissipate. So what was kind of your experience when you first started removing the vegetables?
And that's the big knock people will try and come at, right? You only feel better because you got rid of all the processed crap. I'm like, no, I got rid of the processed crap before. Like I was strictly whole foods, single ingredient, literally nothing that was, and people will hear this and go, well, everything's processed. The moment you pick an apple off a tree, it's processed. Like everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? We're talking about highly processed stuff that you cannot make at home. And it was the vegetables instantly. Like I instantly felt better. And that was the first time in my life that I realized you could eat and not bloat. And people think that's crazy, but you wake up first thing in the morning and before you take a sip of water, you do your progress pics, right? Because the moment you drink some water, all of a sudden it looks like you're 10 pounds heavier. And you're like, this is like, I spend my entire life to look really, really good when I first pop out of bed. And then I don't look the same the rest of the day. And then I wake up and this vicious cycle. And then I realized that I could eat 2 pounds of ribeye in one sitting and not look any different. And I'm like, how is this? Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And so it was the vegetables from a digestive standpoint, especially the bloating right away. Now, could I attribute, the other benefits that I had to the higher fat content and more red meat? Probably, but it's definitely, I've never shied away from fat. I've usually eaten lean because I'm trying to stay within my calories, but definitely the removal of vegetables was the biggest, driver towards feeling good initially.
Yeah. When exactly was it that you came across Saladino and started experimenting?
So my wife had sent me a couple of his things a few weeks before I started. I started September of 22, and the final straw was I was in Vegas for an anniversary trip, and I just didn't feel good the whole time. And I didn't like being at the pool because I was like, I've been lean my entire life, right? Like I basically popped out of the womb with a six pack. Like that's just my genetic makeup is I've always been lean, especially around the torso, and not being that way and being at a pool and be like, man, I literally don't look better than anybody else here. I was like, that's kind of sad. And so I just felt so terrible. Like anybody's been to Vegas, like you literally, you like smell the food and you're like, oh, gosh, like, and then you drink and you don't sleep enough. And it's just a recipe for disaster. Right. So I came home and it was that, I think we came home like on a weekend and that Monday I started. And I've had some, I'm not the strictest carnivore in the world. I have some variances. I've done the 4K SAT experiment where I literally just ate garbage for 3 weeks. But since then I've been very predominantly based in that way of eating.
It's amazing. And what are some like the biggest health changes or improvements that you've noticed outside of the bloating?
So the bloating was the first. I started sleeping better, started getting more energy. It made it easier to work out. Then I started dropping weight, which made me just want to move more. And then I've had like bouts of psoriasis. Again, like all of my stuff is to a degree that I never would go to a doctor. Like I went to a doctor for a few things and I'll touch on that. But it's like those annoying things, right? Like you get a spot on your knee and you're like, man, that's super annoying. And so you buy a couple creams and you try them and nothing works. And you're like, that would be super cool if that would just go away. It's not a big enough deal that I'm going to go to a dermatologist, but it's annoying, right? So my psoriasis went away. I've had bad bouts of eczema my entire life. That became easier to control. You know, I mentioned the sleep and the energy, and then I would just not have these roller coasters. And I noticed it when I went on the 4K SAD where I was eating, 500 grams of carbs every day, where I would feel on top of the world, right? I'm like, man, this is why am I not eating carbs every single day? And then an hour later, I'd be like, okay, that's why. I was like, man, it's borderline depressing to go from the high that I was just on to where I'm at now. I'm like, man, I kind of like the even kill. I kind of like feeling like that and not having these, the afternoon lull where I'm like, man, I almost feel like I need a nap. So those were the biggest ones. Joint inflammation was huge too. People want to talk about strength on low carb. My strength improved because I didn't have to modify my workouts for my shoulders. Like I was a college athlete. I had 4 surgeries by the time I was 21 years old. So I've had a lot of joint, issues that I have to be, cognitive of, and having less inflammation and not, so for example, I've never been able to bench press. Like I work bench press in and I can do dumbbells okay, but a barbell bench press has, wrecked my shoulders since I was 16 years old. I can now barbell bench press. And it's not, I might get a little sore every once in a while. I got to be a little cognitive of it. But before I would, typical 20s, right? I would wreck myself in the gym, absolutely wreck myself. I'm like, man, I feel decent. And then not be able to do anything overhead for 2 weeks because my shoulder hurts so bad. And then I would do it again, right? And it was just this vicious cycle. And I never made any progress because I'm benching once every 3 weeks and it hurts like hell the moment I put heavy weight on it. So that's also the biggest one is I can roll out of bed and not feel like I got ran over by a bus.
What are your 20s without self-abuse? I mean, you never really lived in your 20s until you abused yourself both in the gym and then in the bar, and oftentimes both in the same day. So I could totally resonate with you there. One thing that you brought up, and I love this because we talk to so many carnivores, and there are people who run the spectrum of ultra strict, won't have a sip of coffee. And then, we talked to them, Robert Sives, who's like, hey, listen, I'm upfront about it. I'm 95% carnivore. And I think when we coach people personally, we, encourage them, hey, if you do this or any nutrition plan, like 90% of the time, right? 90% of the time, like you're going to be winning. So where do you fall along that spectrum in terms of like, what would you say your percentage of carnivore is? And what does the other percentage look like? And just for the audience right now, this is not an encouragement, to say that it's okay to do, but I just want to get somebody else's perspective on how they approach carnivore.
So I always found, even back in my 20s, that I did best when I was super strict all the way until a planned cheat meal or cheat day. And I could do that. There were people who'd be like, I'm 12 weeks out. First of all, my preps were always short. I would always like straight rush my preps. But people would go, yeah, it's 10 weeks. I cut out cheat meals. Like, bro, I go up to like 3 weeks and keep cheat meals because it always worked for me. I didn't have, negative repercussions. I didn't feel bad. I didn't put on weight. I would honestly sometimes I would lose weight, right? I'd sit down and eat 5,000 calories of fast food and then wake up leaner the next morning. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. So that's honestly how I approach carnivore, not to the same extent. When I am eating carnivore, I'm strict carnivore. I drink coffee. For anybody that's like that's not carnivore. Ken Berry drinks coffee. Like, if it's good enough for him, it's good enough for me. I don't want to give up coffee. I gave it up for 3 weeks just to prove that I could. and I didn't notice any benefits. So I'm like, I'm just going to go back to drinking it. So I will typically, it's not that often, but if I'm going to go out on a date, right? If I'm going to go out to a restaurant, I don't eat out hardly ever. I honestly haven't eaten out since I was in college, right? Like it's just, I always prepare my own food. So on the times that I am going to, I'll have that as like an allowance. I'll work that in. Like, all right, I'm going to, be a little, if I'm going to get a burger, I'm going to get it with the bun. Maybe I'll get a pasta dish if it sounds super good. So I will have these days or these meals, where that's, built into my program. But on the other days, I'm super strict and I will stay there with it the whole time.
It's so interesting. Like, I didn't expect you to say that. For me personally, definitely not great at moderating. Like, it's just abstaining is better for me with pasta and everything else. So, like, have you always been a moderator?
Yeah, I've never had a problem. Part of it's my personality. I really don't have anything as far as like addictive personality. I can start and stop stuff pretty much whenever. It's just always been easier for me to plan it into my meals, right? Like, so I'm gonna have a cheat meal on Saturday. So I wait till Saturday and eat it rather than having a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I love that.
So a little nuanced for this discussion, but when you do implement those meals, and especially with their higher carb, do you feel like it does help your workouts? Because personally, like for me, I do feel like sometimes, and again, for us, it's very rare to have those types of like cheat meals or anything like that. But I do kind of feel like it gives me that little extra glucose that maybe my muscles can utilize and hold on to and use for a workout, or even just help to fill out a little bit more, which again, I know that's getting into the weeds for people that are like, what are you guys talking about? But in terms of maintaining muscle fullness, I mean, do you feel like it helps you, or, you just really don't notice an impact?
I don't really think it helps from an energy standpoint. I feel like I will be better for like the first half an hour and then I'll start to fade faster. I do notice a little bit more fullness and a little bit better pump and a little bit better vascularity, right? So that is the one, but there's a spillover for me. And so I haven't really found a good, way to work them in and get the benefit while still staying fat adapted. And it's not big enough that I really want to do it that often. Right. So I think if I was going to be, maybe do a show, or if I was looking for one specific day where I had the best vascularity and the best pump and the best workout, it would be, a night of higher carbs, and then either the day after or the day following that I had the best. But it's not enough that I want to do that consistently, right? Or I want to like plan that in, or, try and play around with doing, 100 grams of carbs this night, and then 4 days later do another 100 grams of carbs. It's just, that part's not worth it to me, right? I'm not a professional bodybuilder. I'm not a professional athlete. Like, I have a life. I have to, I have other considerations, and that little bit that I get isn't worth, I feel fine after eating carbs. And that's, people are going to be upset about that. Like, people get upset. I can literally eat whatever I want and feel fine. I might be bloated that night, but I'll wake up the next morning and be totally fine. But I have been kicked out of like a keto state, and I don't like it at all. So for me, I would rather, just rein it back and, have it pretty sparingly, as opposed to trying to play around with, where I can toe the line.
Like that. Well, it's funny you said about your personality. You're more of like a planner, right? You'll plan things out, but the one thing that really caught my attention about your personality is you are funny. Your Instagram account is I love the humor. Like, have you always been funny, or is this part of the online personality?
I'm just sarcastic, right? And that doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah.
I actually met this lady yesterday who has a bison farm. And oddly enough, like, I went in there probably 9 months ago and bought some. And then about 2 months ago, I got an email and it was like, hey, do you live in Buckeye? And it was to my carnivore email. I was like, man, I don't know who this is, but yeah, sure, I'll play. Yeah, I live in Buckeye. She's like, have you ever been to Adam's Natural Meats? And I was like, yeah. She's like, oh my gosh, I thought I recognized you. I was like, okay. And so we talked a little bit. She's like, yeah, come on in. I got a sample box for you. So I went in there and she's like, oh my gosh, you're so serious online. And then, you first came in and you smiled. And I was like, okay, you're not as like serious. I'm like, no, I'm not really that serious of a person. Like, I can be serious. I kind of have a little bit of that female RBF going on, but most of my videos are of a more serious nature, and me being sarcastic that's just who I am. And
It's
so
the New York in us admires the
Oh,
sarcasm in you.
absolutely.
We're like, you're unfazed. People, like you said, they want to come and they want to get angry about this topic or that topic. And you're just like, no, bro, like, we're not doing that.
But what I'll also say though is that what I really appreciate, and this is going to come from like the, the evidence-based science side of me, is that it's not just sarcasm for the sake of sarcasm or trying to be funny. It's like you're actually pushing a point
Yeah.
where you are always presenting evidence as to why you believe this may be the best approach for someone or anyone to take as far as their nutrition is concerned. So you want to just like elaborate on that a little bit, because I think because we come from this background of bro science and where as bodybuilders, a lot of it is all about, like you said before, experimentation. I'll try this. That worked. Let me try that. That worked. So where is this for you, like this intersection between, science as well as like the anecdotal evidence?
So it started, I really didn't have this intention when I started at all, to be honest. And it's one of the reasons that my account's grown. Like I spent over the first year basically in like Instagram jail. Like not really, but none of my videos ever did anything. It took me over a year for one video to hit 10,000 views. Like that's not engagement, that's views. And I think at about a year, I had like 3,500 followers. I was doing better on other platforms. I was doing a lot better on Twitter, so I wasn't as disheartened, but I was like, man, that'd be super cool if Instagram would like take off a little. And then I started doing some of those type videos, and I realized, especially for Instagram, that's what people liked. And honestly, the place that I come from is, again, this is going to sound bad, but I'm just going to say it. Nutrition science is garbage for the most part. And anybody who's done much in nutrition science will understand because of just the natural limitations that you have. The biggest one being ethics. You can't lock twins in a metabolic ward and study them for their entire lives, which is really the only way you'd be able to say this diet is better than the other diet. And I realized that everybody that's on social media, especially fitness influencers, cite studies and claim that they're gospel. Like we can't do that. And honestly, one of the first videos I did was the video on LDL with the consensus panel from the European Atherosclerosis Society. And I didn't realize it. This is something I'd known for like 9 months, but I didn't realize people had never looked at the conflict of interest section. And I was like, we have, for anybody who's never read the study, it basically came out as this consensus of, I've actually read cardiologists state this. This is the consensus of every cardiologist that has ever lived. Well, it's not, but that's how they view it. So they came out with this gospel statement that LDL causes heart disease. And in addition to that, their recommendation is that you use some sort of therapy, pharmaceutical and based, to lower your LDL. Seems reasonable as you like go back and look through all these studies and how they came up with their data. And then you go to the conflict of interest and it's literally riddled with statin manufacturers. And so I was like, what? I mean, because you have this, you see a bunch of names, right? And you recognize Pfizer, maybe you recognize Merck, but then you're like, what are all these other companies? And I'm like, cool, LDL lowering drug, LDL lowering drug, LDL lowering drug. And it's not like they're like, hey, one person, we let somebody do a conference. That conflict of interest statement, I forget the exact number, but it was like 140 times that 7 companies were listed. And I'm like, literally every single person on this consensus panel has been paid by a statin manufacturer. And so I did a video on it and it went crazy. And I was like, oh, maybe, I guess stuff that I just took for granted. Like I took for granted that somebody would read the full thing and like scan to the conflict of interest. I guess it's not that common. So I just started doing stuff like that. And most of my videos have been in response to somebody citing a study that is usually anti-carnivore, because we all get hit with it, right? Like, oh, you eat red meat, it's going to cause colon cancer. You eat saturated fat, it's going to cause heart disease. You eat red meat, it's going to raise your LDL. You don't eat fiber, it's going to cause, a higher risk of all-cause mortality. And people didn't have a defense to that. And the fitness influencers would see this study right here. And I realized that in 5 minutes, you could be like, this isn't exactly the evidence that you think it is. And then so that's where that came about. And my approach is, yeah, we can use evidence, from these to formulate hypotheses that we then test. But at the end of the day, N equals 1 is the most important thing. Like it does not matter if you eat red meat and you become infinitely healthier. It doesn't matter what any study says, right? Just like if somebody told me, they're like, hey, I started smoking cigarettes and my cancer went away, my diabetes went away, all of these things happen, I'd be like, probably should keep smoking. Like, even though the research says it's bad for you, right? It's one of those things, and people hate anecdotal evidence. And I'm like, sure, if you think that, a government should not make guidelines and recommendations off a couple anecdotes, I'm fine with that. But to tell somebody experiencing an antidote that they're not correct because of what they're experiencing, I think is the most ridiculous thing in the world. And it doesn't make sense to me because coming from a sports background, we actually used to tell this people, if, younger kids, if a kid could hit a baseball standing on his head, let him do it, right? It doesn't, in all sports, you see people with funky mechanics and, going against the grain and all, and they're like, hey, if it works for you, do it. But when it comes to nutrition, we go, no, you can't. You're like, why? Like that just, it doesn't make sense to me.
So good.
Yeah, and that makes total sense because we have these. How many golfers have we seen with like the most awkward swings, and yet they can hit a ball a mile, they hit it with accuracy. They're on the PGA tour. You just don't get there just by swinging the club. Most of us who try to play golf, we know that. But yeah, I love what the approach that you're taking with it, because really what it says is that, number one, you can't trust any of the studies, and even the ones that are supportive of, let's just say, our side, we'll call it our side of the equation. You really need to look deeper into it, and most people won't take the time. What they want is they want the news headline. And that's what we get out of a lot of studies, is you literally get a news headline, and next thing you know, if you start searching that headline online, you just find every major news outlet has the same exact story written the same exact way. And this is how poor information gets disseminated. And it's, in some ways it's frustrating because it's an uphill battle for those of us who have discovered a different way of doing things, a way that's working. We implement it with other people, it works with them, and yet you still have these people like, pushing back hard, saying, you guys are out of your mind, this doesn't make sense, what's the matter with you? You're going to be the cause of all of these people dying of heart disease. It's like, no, bro. Like, you got to take a step back. Like, there's evidence on both sides, but at the end of the day, it comes down to like the practical application of that evidence, right? So,
And that's honestly why I don't do too many videos trying to support my views with studies, right? Like if I'm bringing up a study, most of it is to just bring some doubt into what somebody's saying. That's why most of my stuff's reaction videos, right? Because you're right. We look at headlines and people cite headlines. Red meat causes colon cancer, right? And so they will say that, and then they'll show this study, and they're like, look, 19%. For every 100 grams of red meat you eat, your risk of colon cancer goes up by 19%. And the average person is like, I don't know what to say to that. I'm like, okay, well, what you say to it is, A, it's an epidemiological study, which means it's 99% of them are an FFQ. Fill out your questionnaire, send it in, and tell them what you ate over the last year. Okay, like everybody knows that we have a problem right there. But then you talk about this 19%. 90% sounds big. Man, I gotta stop. Like 20% increase until you realize that almost all of these are a relative risk assessment. And what's a relative risk? Well, it means that I have a 4% chance of getting colon cancer. Now I have a 5% chance. And people are like, well, that's pretty minuscule. Exactly. 19% sounds better. Just like 100% sounds better. But I could, if you told me a study came out that red meat raises your risk of cancer by 100%, but I only went from 1% to 2%, I'm probably not going to listen to it. I don't care, right? Am I really going to worry about a 2% risk of something? Sure, I might try to minimize things, but like people have to like zoom out and look at what we're actually talking about, because we go about our everyday without even thinking about that. Like I actually want to look up the statistics. I use this analogy. What if I told you that you are 40% more likely to die in a drunk driving accident by driving at night? Are you only going to drive during the day? No, you're going to understand that there's probably a greater risk of driving at night, but I'm still going to drive at night. And I don't make plans around that statistic. So it's people just get, yeah, you're 100% right. It's headlines, right? They're headlines designed to clickbait and get people's attention. And then nobody goes any further past that.
So true. It's sensationalized. And all I can think about is the study of don't drink coffee while you're pregnant. But I remember going and reading the study, and those women were drinking 8 cups of coffee. I'm like, who drinks 8 cups of coffee? Like, you can drink one or you could drink two. Well,
Right.
maybe you sometimes. So, we've slimmed down on that. Yeah, I completely agree with you about that. And just for the record, red meat doesn't cause colon cancer. So I just want to make sure nobody's sitting here being like, hold on a second. Am I going to go from 2 to 3%? No, you're not. Plus, too, those people aren't, they say a burger, that's red meat. I'm sorry. What about the bun and the fries and all the fried food and everything else that they had with it? Like, it wasn't just a burger. It was a lot of other things that have a greater contribution towards people being unwell and chronically inflamed than the meat patty.
If we could just take a little side note here. Now, you've been on carnivore nearly 2 years, okay? And with that being said, I mean, what has been the evolution for you? I
Mhm.
find that everybody's journey is a little bit different. Some start off super strict, some not so much. Maybe what has been different in the last 6 to 12 months compared to the first 6 to 12 months?
What's been different the last 6 months is a better understanding of how carnivore affects me. So the first 6 to 12, I was pretty lenient, right? I still try to do bulks with adding in carbs because it was hard to gain weight. And then the last 6 months, I really started doing a bunch of personal experiments that I shared on social media. And I realized that this really is the optimal way for me to eat from a lifestyle standpoint, but also from what my goals are in the gym. Again, if I was a professional bodybuilder, would I eat this way? Maybe. I don't know. But as a professional bodybuilder, I would worry less about how I felt during the day. Like it's only based on what I can do in the gym and what my benefit's going to be from the gym. I remember being on contest preps and feeling just absolutely terrible, like just horrible. I'm like, okay, well, if I did that on carnivore, honestly, I think I would feel a lot better. And so maybe if I came in just a little bit worse on carnivore, that would be worth it because my entire life would be better. Like last 4 weeks of prep, my life was ruined. I was wrecked. I was worthless at work. I was worthless at home. Luckily I was single most of the time that I was doing this, but like your life, you basically tell everybody you're like, hey, I got like 4 weeks where I'm just going to be like a miserable insert whatever you want. Don't take it personally. And anybody in the fitness industry is like, oh yeah, yeah, I get it. I'm like, why? Why did I do that? I wasn't going anywhere, right? Like, unless I want to take some drastic steps, I don't have a future in pro bodybuilding. Why am I doing this? Like, I'm paying to do this. Bodybuilding shows are expensive. I'm paying a lot of money to do this. And so, my realization is we really should focus on how it affects your daily life because I've realized that if I sleep better, I have a better gym session. If I have more stable energy, I can work out for 2.5 hours and be totally fine. I've also realized I don't have to work out as much. In my 20s, I was, 6 days a week, maybe 7 days because I was bored. Now I go 10 days in between gym sessions sometimes. And yeah, I want to get that a little stricter. But if I'm super busy, if I'm like really trying to push out some stuff, I'm okay with that. Right. If I only work out 4 days a week, if I only work out 3 days a week, if my workout is doing push-ups throughout the day, I'm okay with it. And I don't feel any negative effects. In my 20s, I'd feel like you lost everything. You're like, man, I've been like 6 days a week for an entire year. And then I took 10 days off and I lost everything. And it would like starts to mess with you mentally and you force yourself to go to the gym. Now, if I wake up and I'm like, man, I got I got a podcast coming up. I don't really want to work out super early in the morning. I live in Arizona, like it's 100 degrees in my garage, 8 o'clock in the morning. I don't really want to sweat super bad before I have to go to this appointment or, this or that, or I just won't work out today. Like I'll hit it tomorrow. And that I still seem to be making progress with a whole lot less emphasis on the amount of time I spend in the gym. I haven't been in a commercial gym in 2.5 years, 3 years. Like I have dumbbells, an Olympic weight set, and a squat rack, like which I don't even
Thanks.
squat anymore because I got back issues. But yeah, so that's what I've realized. It's so much easier just to have my normal life.
Yeah, I would even argue that the reason why you're getting, great progress now is because of the infrequency. I mean, those who listen to us know that we are very much like of a high intensity training approach where it's, short,
3 days a week,
frequently. I mean, yeah.
2 days a week
And
for
and
15 years.
and that's it. I mean, for me, 25 years, I've trained an average of 3 days a week for an average of 90 minutes. And
Total. So
that
30 minutes a
yeah.
session. Yeah.
And sometimes I remember being younger and worrying, like, oh man, like I didn't get in that seventh day, all my gains are going to be gone, and you have that anxiety, and probably that anxiety just raised cortisol levels and is what led to, you bleeding glucose out of your muscles and falling flat and all those things. But it is interesting that, yeah, I think the simplest approach that people can take with regards to their health is you implement high intensity resistance training, right? Or any type of weight training and a carnivore based diet, right? Or an animal based diet. And it's like you do those two things and you don't realize how much it could make up for, that we don't have to have these overly complicated approaches to our fitness or nutrition. And I think that it is the overwhelming, complicated aspects of nutrition and exercise for most people that keep them from being successful. And I think that those of us who have been, I'm going to say, lucky enough to stumble upon this carnivore journey and also have that background where we recognize the importance of resistance training, it's like it to me, that is like that is the holy grail of long-term health and fitness. And it's not all about, big muscles or looking ripped up, although I too wish that I would have discovered carnivore while I was competing, because as she will tell you, I was the hangriest person on the face of the earth. And you were doing maybe 12 weeks of prep. I never did anything less than 6 months. It was always 6 months or more of prep. And I think in one season we went 11 months
Oh,
altogether.
yeah. The first was 9 and then, yes, 11. Well, and the crazy thing too is, coming from not in that world and then being introduced to that world, you begin to see like what people think of that world. I mean, I walked into the first bodybuilding show with Mike. We're both competing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like all these people have like these amazing bodies and they're so sexy. Like they must be going out and like partying and like hanging out and like having these amazing conversations. And I walked in and like people are either laying down or they're sitting down in a corner by themselves with their hood over their head and at earphones in. And I was like, this is weird, and then you're exchanging stories of like how terrible you feel and how much you cut out. And I was like, this is not what I expected. It was such a flip of I think how people view that world. Cause again, you see pictures on Facebook, you're like, wow, he or she looks amazing. They feel like butthole. And it is not a fun journey to walk. I want to ask
Yeah.
about like doctors, blood work. Like, do you keep track of that? Do you go for regular checkups? I know a lot of like the mainstream doctors are going to say, oh, your cholesterol is too high. And we're going to say, shut up, you know what you're talking about. But how do you track your health for yourself?
So I have not had a primary physician literally my entire life outside of my pediatrician, right? I listed my pediatrician on forms until I was like 30 because I didn't have anybody. Like I haven't seen that guy since I was, I don't know, 14 years old. I have other like medical professionals that I, converse with. As far as health, I get all my own blood work done. There's a cool site called Own Your Labs, where you pay them and they write you blood orders. And then you take it to a lab and get your blood work done. And so I've done that a couple times. I did that with my experiments. And honestly, like everything checks out, but it's more for people who are skeptical, right? And again, yeah, everybody goes, what's your LDL? I'm like, who cares? Like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, okay, so here's my problems with LDL. First of all, it's not cholesterol like everybody thinks it is. It's a lipoprotein that shuttles cholesterol. It is essential. It's, I think, one of the most harmful things in medical society today is this notion that we want super low LDL. Like, well, you have super low LDL, and now all of a sudden, all of your cellular functions, brain included, suffer because they need cholesterol and they need LDL to shuttle it. Right. So that's step one. Step two is, everybody will talk about you have your LDL and your HDL. And those are your two cholesterol numbers. Like, okay, well, what about the rest? Like, what are you talking about? I mean, there's 13 different substrates that they've discovered just of LDL. Well, what do you mean? I'm like, there's not just one, right? Like LDL, HDL triglycerides is a test from the 60s. Like we're still using a 1960s metric to give people life-altering medications because there's a ton of problems that can happen with statins. And, when they go that, I'm like, wait, well, what are you, huh? I'm like, yeah, they're not all the same. And then, then you realize that, yeah, LDL is a part of heart disease, but it's not necessarily the cause. Like you still need some type of inflammation. You still need an oxidation of an LDL particle. And more often than not, it's not the LDL that you're being tested for, right? It's small, dense particles that can easily get lodged in your arterial walls. And then, you start doing all of these things. And I'm like, why would I base all of my health off of one number? And it was even more put into perspective for me when I realized that LDL number, right? That is the number one number. And if you have an elevated level, they'll write you a prescription right there without looking at anything. You could have super low triglycerides, super high HDL. You could have great insulin, great blood glucose, no obesity, and they will write you a prescription just based off that number. That LDL number is not even measured. It's a calculated number. It's an equation that they use. 95% of blood work that you get done is not actually calculated LDL. And when you have low triglycerides and high HDL, that number can be off by quite a bit, right? And so I've had it be calculated and the direct measurement, and my direct measurement was like 40 points lower.
Wow.
Like it's not like 5, right? Like it's huge difference. And so when I look at it, I'm like, okay, well, when these tests came out, I think 250 was optimal for your LDL. And now they're like, well, 150. And they go, man, people are still dying of heart disease. Let's do 100. And people are still dying of heart disease. Let's do 50. Like, let's aim for 50. I'm like, you should just pick an arbitrary numbers, right? Based off data that you come up with. And it's like, okay, so if I look at all of my blood work, all of my physical, how I'm feeling, and everything is great, but I have one number that you think is elevated, I'm good with that.
You bring up an amazing point, especially when you consider that when everybody was pushing for lower LDLs, what did we introduce? We introduced statins. And I can't even tell you the number of clients. I'm sure you see it as well. Number of clients coming, oh yeah, my doctor said that my LDLs are a little high. They want to put me on a statin. And now we've been doing this experiment, so to speak, for decades. And heart disease has not improved at all. You could argue that it's gotten even worse, even though we've been pushing for lower LDLs, and we even have drugs that can help get you there literally overnight. So I just find it interesting that nobody has put two and two together and said, you know what? Maybe that's not the cause. Maybe it has nothing to do with LDLs at all.
People have put it together. It's just it's such a cash cow that no one would allow anyone to put two and two together. And it's funny because there will be people that will look at what the three of us here are doing with our diets and that's irresponsible. And what you're saying is irresponsible. Actually, what your doctor is telling you is irresponsible because there is research and there is information out there that they're just turning a blind eye to. And they're writing a script that they're going to get paid and compensated for. I mean, I don't know about you, but we're not getting paid for the statements that we make. We're not getting paid to share our personal experience. I mean, maybe there's, some affiliate deals here and there and things that crop up. And it's very nice to, I don't know, get some carnivore bars or whatever it might be shipped to your house, And again, you give a review for those items, but it's like the money that gets exchanged hands is just too great that it is irresponsible, but easier to turn that blind eye.
And I think the money is huge. And anybody that talks to me and says they don't think pharmaceutical companies have a hand in this stuff, I'm just like, you've got to be insane. Like you cannot look at a pharmaceutical company and tell me they have our best interest. And so the two things I bring up, especially with statins, and there's, for anybody listening, there's other LDL lowering medications, but I clump them all into the same because statins are, what everybody hears. The most successful drug of all time was Lipitor, which is Pfizer's statin. Lipitor was so successful that today, I haven't looked in the last month, but a couple months ago, it was still the third highest selling drug of all time. I'm like, oh, it's number 3. I'm like, their patent expired over 10 years ago. They have not been able to corner the market in the last 10 years, and it is still the third highest selling drug of all time. When their patent expired, it wasn't even close. Like you had Lipitor over here and then everything else. So like, red flag number 1 is this is literally the most profitable drug in the history of pharmaceuticals. So who benefits the most from somebody coming out and saying you should be on statins, right? They're testing statins on children. You can't tell me this is for heart disease. This is so they can just broaden their clientele. Like don't talk to me about ethics with a pharmaceutical company. Just go look up the fines that they've paid. Billions and billions of dollars. And it's not because, they, cross some red tape here. They're killing people. by lying about studies, by lying about drugs, by lying of, all of these lawsuits on drugs that have to be pulled from the market because they skewed, the initial trials that got them FDA approval in the first place. So anytime pharmaceutical has that big of a hand in something, I'm not going to trust it whatsoever.
Look at every Super Bowl. I mean, who can afford the commercial spots? It's the pharmaceutical companies. And two, you have the ability to pay out billions of dollars in fines and you haven't gone bankrupt. You're still around. How much are you making off of us?
It's insane. The amount of money is insane. And I'm glad you bring up the Super Bowl because then that just goes into mainstream dietary recommendations. And part of why I have such a problem with most dietitians is I'm actually going to do a video. This dietitian in a comment was like, imagine thinking as a non-dietitian, you know more about this subject than me. And then in her video stated that the brain runs solely on glucose. And I was like, and I'm like, okay, so why is this a problem? The society that oversees the credentials for dietitians, guess who their main donors are? Coke, Pepsi. Like, I don't know who owns Frito-Lay anymore, but, General Mills, all of these major food companies. I'm like, why are major food companies the main backer for what's supposed to be the highest organization for nutrition in our country? Like, get out of here. Like, you guys can't, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's literally like just waking up and going, I wonder if there's financial incentive here.
Well, let's go back to the Super Bowl again for a moment. Think about all of the spots. You have drug companies who could afford to do spots. Then you have, again, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, you have Frito-Lay's, all the snack companies, Doritos. Doritos always has a major spot, right? And then to take it a step further, who else do you see? Well, alcohol companies, alcohol. And then fourth, you have like Shriners Hospital for children, right, who have all of these issues that have to be dealt with. And just in the Super Bowl alone, you could look at the commercials that are being played and see the actual problem that's occurring. People are getting, addicted to food. Then they're drinking alcohol on top of that, right? Then they're taking medications for all these things. And then we keep pushing this on the youth. And now we have to get advertised for children's hospitals like never before.
I never thought that the life cycle of a standard American diet is literally shown over the course of the Super Bowl. Like that's literally the cycle of Americans. Like that's exactly what happens.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Method podcast. The three of us uncovered what's really going on in the world.
The number of people who are like, man, you should like watch out. When I came out with that LDL video, they're like, you should like be a little more careful, bro. Like you're gonna get. I'm like, I should probably like, I don't know.
You took the words literally out of my head. I'm like, if any of us disappears suddenly or like, strangely, suspiciously, it was not us, just FYI. Let's end with family. You are a husband, you are a dad, you have found something that works for you physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, how does that then segue into family life?
I have a lot more patience, which is still not my strong suit. Anybody who reads my comments back can kind of know that. Yeah, I don't have the best patience, which is not the easiest when you have a 5 and 3-year-old, but not having roller coasters of energy makes that a lot easier. It's a lot easier to take a step back and take a breath. I'm still not great at it, but I vividly remember times where, and again, I don't like to bring this up because I don't want to be disingenuous towards people that have actual, mental struggles that they're going through. But I think most of us can realize there's times either during the day or during, seasons that you struggle with, some type of mental something, right? Whether it's anxiety or depression. And again, I'm not trying to, devalue anybody that has, lifelong depressive issues. But when you have these roller coasters of energy, and I found this during the 4K SAT experiment where there was times where my energy would be low and I would go, man, why am I doing this? Like, I don't like feel that great. And then I'm like, man, I could see how this could spiral into like full on depression. And when you're trying to deal with kids and family and you have that going on as well, like that just adds to the stress of it, especially as men where, we don't express any of that stuff. Like you don't ever tell anybody if you have, depressive type things or things that you're trying to work through. So just being able to be more even keel has helped a ton. And then, I feel better about myself. I feel as good as I did in my 20s. Like, I was the guy in my 20s. I always wanted my shirt off because I felt good. Like, I've worked hard. I do this. I eat well. I always want to be, walking around with my shirt off. And then, when I first became a dad and I started gaining weight, I was like, I never want my shirt off because I don't feel good about how I look. Even though if you put me in a lineup with an average American, I'd probably feel okay about myself. But I was so far removed from where I was in my 20s that like I don't feel that good. So just those little things have just made it a lot easier just to navigate because parenthood's tough enough as it is. You don't need extra things on top of it.
I appreciate you sharing that so much. And it is interesting, it's almost like because we don't have chronic depression and chronic anxiety, there's this silencing, like you're not allowed to talk about that. I'm with you. We got back from a big vacation, back to a business trip, opened a brand new gym on Monday. And yesterday I was feeling like I don't really want to do anything, like almost like sad inside. And of course, like after coming off an event, never to the extent pre-carnivore. Like I had, and Mike will tell you honestly, and I'll talk about it openly, like high highs. And then they were like low, like fetal position in my bed, but still not a diagnosed condition. Like, why can't we talk about that and have that conversation? Because I think if we can open the doors to that, other people are like, oh my gosh, I feel like that sometimes. Like, wait, you mean I could feel like not as bad if I just changed my diet a little bit? Like, that's amazing. So thank you so much for shedding and shining a light on that. I think it's incredibly important. And this whole conversation with you was such a pleasure. I mean, we could talk for another hour, I think,
Well, I want to talk
all
about one
things.
thing though before we go.
I think you guys need to hang out though. Like
I
you guys are so similar in every way.
we most definitely will, and then it'll be a contest to see who could keep their shirt off the longest.
I live in Arizona. I only put a shirt on for podcasts. I haven't got to the point where I do podcast topless yet, but it's close. It's
I love it.
freaking 115 every day here.
That's wild. What I did want to bring up, and you had done a post a while back that I thought it's honestly, I think it's my favorite post that you have done. And it was you discussing your before and after photos. And I thought this was huge because again, being in the position that you're in as a fitness and nutrition influencer, there's a lot of those out there. And most of them achieve their fame via a before and after photo. And you gave the most honest, I don't want to call it advice. I mean, the honest portrayal of before and after. And I'm just going to ask you, I'm not going to ruin, don't want to steal your thunder. Like just walk everybody who hasn't seen it, what that particular post was about. And then we're going to encourage everybody to go to Carnivore JT on Instagram and find that particular post because I thought it was excellent.
So you're talking about the carnivore truths.
Yeah.
So those are all saved under my story highlights, so you don't have to scroll through the page. Yeah, what I found people doing insane, especially people who have any type of muscle, is their comeback would be, you didn't build all your muscle going carnivore. I never said I did. Like I literally have never told anybody that carnivore was this magical gateway to me gaining muscle. And so I decided to do a post addressing it. And yeah, I did have really good results in carnivore. I lost 30 pounds. And, everybody looks at it and they go, that's not possible. I'm like, well, it is possible because all I was doing is getting back to a state that I helped build up for the last almost 20 years. Actually, it has been 20 years. I've been in the gym for 20 years outside of, a few injuries where I was not in the gym for a couple months and the 2.5 years that I gained the weight in the first place. I've been in the gym consistently, probably 5 days a week. Like if I went and tallied up every day outside of those 2.5 years, probably 5 days a week for almost 20 years. And carnivore allowed me to get back to it. It did not all of a sudden, because it is a drastic change. And I'm like, well, that's literally what fat can do. Like you shed fat and all of a sudden you see what's underneath. It's also kind of super disheartening to look at it and be like, man, I literally just covered up everything that I've done for the last almost 20 years by gaining 30 pounds of fat. And so I really wanted to impress on people that no, carnivore didn't make me go from, your standard American dad bod to being lean and ripped in the gym, but it did help me get back there. And then I showed my competition photo from believe it was 2016. And I was like, this is where I was. Like, so yeah, I think I look a little bit better now than I did back then, but like carnivores helped me improve my physique this much from where I was. And, you know, a lot of people, it did reach out and appreciated that, because it would be really easy to say, yeah, look, man, I was like lazy and out of shape. And then I did carnivore and I got super lean and jacked. You should do carnivore too. Buy my coaching program. And I didn't want people to get that idea, uh, you know, that I magically got these, you know, you can look like this too if you go on carnivore for 3 months. Like, no, you still got to work out for like 20 years, you know, and there's people who are more genetically gifted that could do that in like 3 years. And I have a problem with them. Like I will spend the rest of my days being like, you know, I'm a little guy. Like I'm, you know, if I were to never work out a day in my life and stay lean, I'd be 5'10", 150 pounds. Right. So I've, you know, had to claw and tooth and 20 years to get where I'm at. But I didn't want people to have this misconception that if you go carnivore, you can look like this too.
That was great because you were just being so genuine. And even outside of the carnivore space, like this is the problem, people, that you just see online, is that regardless, I don't care if you're talking carnivore, paleo, keto, vegan, you know, you go down the list of different approaches to diet and exercise, and everybody wants to lay claim that the thing that they're into right now was the reason for these outstanding results or that after picture that they're now showing, when in fact, if we were to pull back the curtain and reveal the truth, it's like, dude, you've been training since you were like 13 years old. You know, you trained through your teens, you got a running head start, you built up muscle. And like you said, you know, you stripped away the fat and boom, you get to present what it is that has been there almost all along through hard work. So there is this level of consistency that is necessary for anyone to see that type of success. And one last thing that I'll just say is I love the fact, though, that today you can say, hey, this is the condition that I maintain because of carnivore. This is how lean I get to remain without having to count calories, right? Or go crazy. I mean, I've heard you talk a lot about that too, and we're in the same boat. I mean, part of like our shtick when we're talking to people is like, hey, no cardio, no calorie counting. And it's because we recognize that if you could find a way where you can eat the way that you enjoy and enjoy the fruits of all the other labor that you're putting in the gym at the same time, to me, that is the ultimate win-win.
For sure. And I've upset some people when I say this. I could look like this eating anyway, right? Like I could probably manipulate my way into eating a standard American diet and still look like this.
Yeah.
Some people don't want to hear that, but it's all the other factors. Like I don't do carnivore per se for this, but yeah, it is way easier. I don't have to track. I don't have fluctuations. I can stay within, you know, if I stay strict and don't waver off of it, again, I don't count. I can probably eyeball better than most people can actually track with a scale, but that's neither here nor there because I don't give the mental time or energy to doing that anymore. But I can stay within a couple pounds without ever tracking or doing anything because of the way I eat. Now, if I go to a standard American, I'm going to have to manipulate, right? I'm going to have to, you know, scale up and down. I'm going to have different days, you know, manipulate my carbs around when I work out, but I could still do it. But this way I am, so my profile picture was taken right at the beginning of the year. I am within, I think this morning I was like 0.4 pounds less than I was in that picture. And I've had some fluctuations because I've done some stuff, but I could stay at probably 190 within 2 or 3 pounds the entire year doing this. And so, yeah, did I get here because of that? No. Does it make my life a whole lot easier? And does it make it a whole lot easier to maintain? Absolutely.
Yeah, we can definitely echo those sentiments. I mean, did the bodybuilding stuff, tried to work in all sorts of stuff from Pop-Tarts and rice cakes and you name it, you know, it's carnivore, it's more of an inside job. It's how you feel emotionally, mentally. It's how you sleep. It's how you interact in your life. It's your mental clarity. It's your mood, you know. I just love, yeah, we're not hangry. We're not hangry anymore. It's great.
Well, with that said, JT, why don't you just let everybody know, you know, number one, if there's anything you got going on right now, and then number two, you know, how they can connect to you.
And your podcast.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So I will have another carnivore experiment coming up this actually is, contrary to what people think, this is actually my first partnership that I've done with a company. I'll give you guys a little insight. It's a body composition analyzer, an at-home one that I actually think is pretty cool. They reached out to me and I was like, it's actually a company that I had a scale of theirs before. And I was like, yeah, like, okay, like I don't do this, like I said, this is my first actual like partnership. I do have affiliates, but for people who don't understand what affiliates is, like you literally just be like, hey, I eat this product. If you want to save money, use a code. They get free marketing. I get money if you, buy it, and my followers get a discount. It's literally a win for everybody. Like I'm not being paid to tell you to eat this, like literally by anybody out there. So I got that coming up. I'm waiting for them to approve the first piece of content so I can bring that out. But then I will go into another carnivore experiment. I'm going to reverse diet my way to honestly see how many calories I can eat before I start gaining weight. I lost weight eating 4,000 calories of carnivore last time. I'm about 10 pounds lighter, so I don't know if I'll have the same results, but I honestly don't know what the level of calories I would need to eat in order to gain fat. I think I'm going to hit my max of how much I'm able to stuff into my mouth. 4,000 calories was tough. I'm coming up with some new ways to basically, if you ever see me do a butter recipe, it's me testing stuff to try and get more calories when it comes down to it. And I got to like figure out how to stuff my gullet. Like, I'm like, I don't want to eat, but I feel like for science, so that's what I got coming up. The podcast, the Inner Carnivore podcast. I'm just about to wrap up season 1, and then I'll do a little bit of a refresh on the logos, the content a little bit, and then I will hopefully have a bunch of the bigger name doctors on. I've been talking with Anthony Shafee, and he'll probably be my first guest on it. And that's the Inner Carnivore podcast. My website is the Inner Carnivore, and then on social, I'm at Carnivore JT.
Love it. It has been such a pleasure, going from just consuming your very entertaining, but again, very educational content to today. Such a pleasure chatting with you, and we'd love to have you back another time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had fun. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, JT. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.